Next, an interview with Klaus Polkehn, the deputy editor of Wochenpost, East Germany's largest weekly newspaper. Our discussion takes place near one of the central streets in East Berlin. Mr. Polkehn talks about the historical perspective of the area, East German politics, and the changes in East German journalism.
Klaus Polkehn, the deputy editor of the weekly newspaper, the Wochenpost. There was an article recently in the New York Times, and I want to quote it and get your reaction from it. It talks about this city, and it says, "This city's Nazi history is like a ghost, unseen, unwanted, yet always present, hidden away in unlikely corners." What is your reaction to that?
Oh, that's hard to say, because we are living in this city and with this history. But I think, well, you can't put away history. History is, I think, it's always present. It is present at this very place. It is present in our life, and I think the latest events are also part of the history or a result of the history. You see, I think splitting up Germany in two parts, it was a result of history, it was a result of the war. Many things which happened came out from history even up to this very day. The latest developments are also part of this history. So I think it's true, it's present, really.
Mm-hmm. Does the normal East Berliner, are they comfortable talking about the past that includes the Nazi regime?
Well, it's hard to say, because people don't normally always talk about history. I think it's also a problem perhaps of generations. For the elder generation, I think they lived it and they don't talk so much about. Younger people are asking questions about histories, always asking questions of history, especially in this very moment, because if you now try to find out what happened during the last 40 years, you have to go back into history. So people are asking questions, especially younger people. How it came, how it developed, what are the reasons for different developments.
What do you tell those young kids?
Well, I try to explain. My daughter, for example, which is nearly 30, she has grown up here. She's asking questions how it came in 1948 with the splitting of Germany, how it came that the wall had been built. Asking questions, was it right to build the wall? Was it right what happened afterwards? Is it today right what is going to happen now? That's a question. And I think the main thing is trying to explain by giving facts, telling about my experience, about the experience of my generation, you see? Because, for example, to give one example, you can't say very easily it was bad or it was a crime to build the wall in '61. But I think one has to understand the situation when the wall was built. What was in the mind of people who built the wall? You see, the wall hasn't been built by one leader, by one government. There were thousands and thousands of people were taking part in this building. So what was in their minds? And I think so one has to understand this too. After so many years, it's easy to say, well, that was wrong, that was right, but one has to see the special situation when things happened. That's it.
Go back for us a little bit. Tell us a little bit. Where did you grow up?
I've been grown up in Berlin. I'm from a very old Berlin family. My father has been grown up a few meters from here, by chance. My grandfather has grown up here, so it's a very old Berlin family.
What does it mean to you to be a German?
A German?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not sure what to say, because people, for example, there is a slogan which has been shown in many demonstrations in the last time, which is even there are button stickers saying, "I'm proud to be a German." I think that's somehow crazy. To be proud, it could have happened that I have been grown up in America. If my father or my grandfather would have chosen to emigrate to America. Many Germans emigrate, so I would be an American today. So why to be proud of a German? I think that's crazy.
Is there a feeling of, you know, people tell us in time this will be one city.
Yeah.
There won't be an East, there won't be a West, West Berlin. Is there a sense of pride among East Berliners, a feel that they don't want to give up their status here? Or their...
You see, at the very beginning of the latest events last fall, there was a feeling of pride of being able to overthrow a regime, to undertake a successful revolution. That gives us a certain feeling of pride, a feeling of power even. Now things start to change. There is a certain pessimistic feeling. People feel unsafe, insecure about what is going on with economy. What are the problems of getting a new currency, West German currency? What are problems with closing factories, having unemployment, and so on? So feelings have changed. But I think generally people feel, concerning the city, everybody felt that, that this is one city that was, in spite of the wall, it was always one city. And during the time when we had the wall and the borders were closed, if somebody was able to pass over to the other side from time to time, and I was able, you always could feel it was really one city.
You really felt it was just
I
one?
always felt it one city. I have to say, I have to add one thing. I myself, I have been grown up in West Berlin. I went to school in West Berlin, and then my family moved over to this part of the city in 1949. So I'm at home in both parts of the city. You see, it's perhaps I have a special feeling, perhaps otherwise than other people, maybe. But I think in general you can say it was always one city. And if you're going to the wall, to the border, you can just see that the streets have cut, bridges have cut. It is one city, really.
How old were you in 1949 when you moved to East
I was
Berlin?
18.
Why did you move from West to the East?
I didn't, at this time I went already to school. My father was working here in the eastern part, and then the split of Germany came, two different currencies. So he got his money in the eastern currency, so we weren't able to pay for rent and everything, so we had to move over.
Did you know that you were...
Many people were moving over from the east to the west and from the west to the east. It was not so abnormal at this time. And you have to have in mind, it was in 49, things were not settled for all. Nobody knew how things would develop. And I think nobody was able to understand and to foresee that this kind of split and this wall would be built afterwards. Nobody could expect it. You see, it was more than fantasy could tell you. So it was not a problem. People were moving around. It was not so abnormal.
When the crackdowns came later on and you were not able to move, was your father disappointed? Was your family disappointed that you had ended up in the East?
No, not so much. You see, I think the closing of the wall, it affected mainly younger people. Elder people after a while could move over. It was not so for elder people. People which were pensioners, they couldn't move over. It was not the problem. The problem was mainly for younger people, which really felt like being in a prison. I really can understand it, that people started to have this kind of feeling.
How old were you when the wall went up?
Well, what, about 30? Well, 30. 30, yeah.
You remember that time?
Well, I remember it very well because I was already working in the newspaper, in Wochenpost already. I can tell you, we were sitting together in the evening before these things happened. During the night, the very night things happened, we were sitting together with some friends, and we had some friends from abroad. There was a Swedish friend which came, and we were discussing the situation, which was really a very complicated situation at the very moment. And some people were saying, well, they expect or they think there might be some steps to close the border. And I just was saying that's impossible. You can't do it in a city like Berlin. And at this very moment, when we were having this discussion, they already started to close the border. I went to bed, and then at about 5 o'clock in the morning, telephone rang. It was the chief editor and asked me to immediately to come to the office. Something is happening. He didn't explain what is going on. And so I went to the office, and well, we knew what is happening. We had to do our journalistic work. That meant to go to the border to see what's going around, to write articles about, together with photo reporter and so on and so on. Not ordinary journalistic work.
Can you go past the ordinary journalistic work? Can you tell us any stories of those first couple days and what you saw as you were covering the wall going up?
Well, you see, I think for many people the feeling was something had to be done, because the situation before was many people were leaving the country. You had problems here with all the services. The tramway didn't run in the right manner because people left, nobody would take your trash at home, and so on and so on. It created problems. So people were coming over from the West, buying things here to a very cheap price, the same situation which we have now. You see, it's repeating. Sometimes history is repeating itself to a certain extent. So many people had a feeling it is necessary to do something, you see. But the feeling was different. There was a special meaning. We thought, I believed at this time, we have to close the border to be able to create a better system here, more democratic, more economically sound. The open border is hindering us in doing these things. A closed border gives us a chance to develop the whole social system into the right manner, to build a better society. We were believing it. I think it needed 2 or 3 years that we understood that that was a big error. But in the very beginning, if you take it into account, this feeling, these ideas, so you can see that, well, many people were against, many people were angry about what was going to happen, but not all. And there were people which understood it might be necessary to do these things, to go this way, you see.
As you were writing for this newspaper at this time, was anybody keeping you from writing anything?
No, you see, the system of we never had since I think 1949 or 1950. We never had this type of censorship you had in other countries. That meant we hadn't to show the articles beforehand to anybody, but there was some sort of supervision. You could write things what you like to write. You could print them, but it was possible to have trouble afterwards. So you had to be your own censor to a certain extent, you see. There were situations where that was not so complicated. If you agree with politics, so it's easy. But there's no problem at all. You are with the, let's say, government or this very powerful leadership of the ruling party. If you agree with them, then it's not a problem. If you start to disagree, then problems begin. And I think we had, in our paper, during the last years, lots of problems, because we felt more and more that things are not going the right direction. There have to be changes. I think the very special point was after 1985, when Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union. Before 1958, we knew, I think that was an experience from events in Poland or in Czechoslovakia, that changes are not possible without changes in the Soviet Union. The Soviet army entered Czechoslovakia in 1968. The Soviet army it was not necessary to enter East Germany. The Soviet army was already here. So everybody knew there's no change, there are no changes possible here before you have changes in the Soviet Union. But when the changes in the Soviet Union came, everybody expected, now the time has come, we can now introduce changes here. And the blocking of these changes by the leadership here, that created problems. And I think that is a real reason for the breakdown of last year. I think that's a real reason. They didn't understand what was going on and what had to be done. And I think in 1985, there was a chance to make changes, other changes, which would create a totally different situation than from today. But they didn't understand. And we had trouble as a journalist, because we started to write in a new manner, to publish new things, and we had always trouble.
Can you define trouble for me? What would happen?
Well, I tried to give one example. We published interviews with prominent people, let's say prominent writers. We had a very large interview with Christa Wolf. I don't know if you know the name. She is a most prominent writer here. Sometimes people were discussing about giving her a Nobel Prize for literature. She's very famous in German. And she was one of those people struggling very hard for changes here. And we published an interview with her, and the leadership of the party made us trouble, asked the chief editor to come, started discussing with him, asked him not to make it again, and well, it's some sort of trouble. You afterward you get an altar or something else.
Did it end up being printed, or did it not?
It had been printed. Sometimes we were able to even to print things like this. For example, last year, I don't know if you heard about this book Troika by Markus Wolf. Markus Wolf is the former chief of, well, GDR CIA, let's say so. He was the chief of the espionage network of DDR. He left his job, I think 3 or 4 years ago, and started writing a book from his own experience with in Soviet Union. He has been grown up in Soviet Union during the Nazi time. He has been grown up together with Americans, which now are back into United States, and he was writing about different people under different circumstances, a very critical book about the situation in the Soviet Union, a critical book about behavior of people. And I think this book is one of the points which prepared the events of last fall. And the book had been published last fall, and we were publishing it as a series beforehand, starting with last spring. And the authorities didn't like it, but the problem was they were not able to stop it. You see, it started. They could have given order to stop it, but that would create trouble. Every reader would ask, what is going on? You see, so they decided not to stop it, but they were really unhappy and that creating trouble for the editor. I think it is a problem of a certain, well, one should be to a certain extent cold-blooded. Not to take things too serious and always saying for themselves, well, let them cry, don't care too much, you see. But I think that was possible only to a certain extent. I think if an editor would, at this time, would have started to publish open attacks, so he immediately would lose his job, because the papers at this time were under control and even owned by government or by party. So they kicked you out in this case. That's quite clear. So we had always to follow, to understand clearly what I am able to do and what I'm not able to do. You see, that was very, very complicated. Now, compared with it, it's easy, because I think we have now the freest press in the world, because there's nobody, even not a publisher, who is going to tell us what we can do or we shall do, or we are so totally free as we never were before. And I think perhaps, I don't know what it's, but as far as I know, the West German press, there's always, mainly in the big newspapers, there's a publisher who's having his hand on the paper. Even the publisher doesn't have a hand here.
Is freedom causing you any trouble in your newspaper? Trouble, I mean, in terms of, do you find problems crop up because you weren't?
No, it's different. Mm-hmm. You see, it's just a different type of work. You have always to you need more time. You have to discuss things. You see, within the staff, there's a problem of responsibility. I have a responsibility. We are publishing every week more than 1 million copies. That means a lot of responsibility towards the reader, towards the public. So we have to discuss it, find a way. What we are selecting, what we are presenting. This is a way, but I think it's a better way.
And this is this week is another kind of milestone for you.
It is, yeah.
As you say here, you went to 48 pages.
Yeah, for the first time we are publishing 48 pages. The problem was that there was always a shortage of paper before, so we couldn't publish more than 32 pages. Now we have for the first time 48 pages. Next week we will be back to 32 again, then 48, but I think after a while we will develop to, I think, maybe 68 pages.
How much does your paper cost?
It cost before, up to the last week, 30 pfennig, now 1 mark. We have to say 1 mark is also relatively cheap compared with other newspapers.
And you have the largest circulation?
Yes, more than 1 million copies every week. Compared with a population of 17 million, that's a lot of, you see.
Are East Berliners, East Germans reading more newspapers now than they used to?
I think at the very moment, yes. You have now since some weeks all the West German newspapers are coming in, and so I think at the very beginning, out of curiosity, people are buying lots of newspapers and getting an idea what it's in. Some new papers have been founded here. One daily newspaper, we have one daily newspaper, a new one. We have some new weekly newspapers which are searching their way. And so out of curiosity, I think, but after a while things will settle down and it will get normal. You have even foreign newspapers. I saw it there's a newsstand over there, and some days ago I saw for the first time foreign newspapers to be sold here, the New York Times and London Times and Guardian, for example, Le Monde. That's for the first time.
Does that shock you as a journalist who's been here all his life?
That's not a shock, because I used to read the New York Times, for example, the New York Herald Tribune, for example, regularly. But people, well, it's expensive, and you must know the language to read it, and it's and the newspapers are expensive. 2 marks 60, that's a lot of for a daily newspaper like International Herald Tribune. That's a lot of.
I must ask you before we go on to other things, is your newspaper affiliated with any political party here?
The newspaper had been, as a publishing house, was owned by the ruling party, by the Communist Party, as SED. Now we are, but the paper itself was independent. Well, not totally independent because it was owned by, but it was not a party newspaper. So a certain degree of independence. Now we are totally independent, really.
Tell us a little bit about the area where we're sitting in and the historical implications of this area.
Well, that's just the city is the center of the city. There are 2 churches over here and over there. Between these 2 churches, 750 years ago, Berlin has founded. You have behind us is a river Spree. I think one can't see it now. The city has been founded as a village of fishermen, and there was a tradeway, a big tradeway from north to south crossing Europe, and it was just this point where the tradesmen had to cross the river. So the city developed just here, and well, it's a traditional city center of Berlin.
In back of you, all the way in back of you, is a building that has a lot of events going on in it, especially this week.
Yeah, it's called Palast der Republik, Palace of Republic. There is the Parliament, Volkskammer, People's Chamber, is in it, together with theater and things like this. And at this very place, up to 1950, stood the old castle of the Prussian kings. Was just situated. It was partly destroyed and was broken down after the war. I think one could have rebuilt it. Unfortunately, they didn't rebuild it. Then, I think 10 years ago, around 10 or 15 years ago, they built this building where now the parliament is in.
Will the parliament continue to meet there? Do we know?
I think so, yes. It's as long as it exists. It depends. I think when we might have perhaps one day one parliament for all of Germany, I think they will go to the old Reichstag building, which is not far away from here, but on the other side of the wall, on the west side.
It's near the Brandenburg Gate.
That's
for
right.
People who may not
exactly. Yeah.
The domed building over here. What is that?
That is the church of the Prussian kings. It is not so old. It's looking older than it is. But at the very place there was a church already, some 100 years ago. But this building is built last century. There are the tombs of some Prussian kings, as far as I know. I have to confess, I wasn't in. For old Berliner, but it is always a problem. You are living in the city and you don't find to go to see some places. That's.
Now you have just told us about 3 churches.
Yeah,
in this,
two churches.
2 churches here, and then this church, one over here. Should I be surprised that there's that many churches in the center of East Berlin?
No, you see, in the Middle Ages, the church was the focus of social life. So to have 2 churches here and there for a city that was, I think, that was normal for the extent of the city. And the other one is later, it is younger, and it was especially for the court, for the king and not for the ordinary citizens. So no, I think it's not so.
How badly was this area, the center of East Berlin, damaged in the war?
Oh, yeah, it was mainly burned down, especially at the end of the war. As a result of the bomb attacks, I think it started mainly in 1944. Even the city hall is also burned out and rebuilt I think at the beginning of the 50s. It was burned out partly. So it was terribly damaged here, yes, it was. And there was lots of fighting here in 1945. You see that you are not so far from this Reichskanzlei, where Hitler's headquarters was, and the last battles of the Second World War in Germany have been fought here. And they were hard fights, you see.
How some of the areas that were important during the Nazi what has happened to those buildings, to those areas? Have they been rebuilt? Have they been destroyed?
No, the Reich Chancellery is totally destroyed. It was burned out at the end of the war, and it was totally destroyed after the war. It is not existing. There are flats now. Then some of the ministry buildings, they are used today as ministries or things like that, those who survived the destructions. But they're existing already, some of them.
Can you look around the square at all and give us an idea of the history, some history of World War II in this area, in any of the buildings that are left that weren't destroyed?
Well, you see, these churches were partly destroyed. This church, the Marienkirche, was partly destroyed. The other, you can see only the towers. Mm-hmm. Nikolaikirche was totally destroyed. It had been rebuilt 2 or 3 years ago already. The houses have been destroyed here. There was street fighting here. You see, at the end of the war. That was the last point. My father was at the end of the war here, not far from this place, and it was. I would say it was dangerous for people because the front changed from one place to the other sometimes because the Nazi troops defending the places were really strong. It was especially these SS troops which were fighting like the hell here. You can understand, they knew what would happen if the Russians were victorious. So they were really hard fighting and re-attacking, so the front changed from place to place, and there are thousands of civilian people here in underground, in the cellars, and affected by this fighting. And it was really hard, and many people killed.
I'm sorry, did you say your father was killed near here?
No. He survived. No, he was with my grandparents, which were living here and not far from this place here. Mm-hmm. And it was dangerous from different points of view because as an adult man who was not in the army, he was not in the German army, he was able to escape. So he had at one hand to be careful not to be catched by the Nazis, the Nazi army, which wanted to press people into the army, or were telling these are deserters and to hang them. This was one point, and the other point was not to be mistaken for a soldier in civil clothes and taken by the Soviet army into prison, into what to say? Well, as a prisoner of war. So it was dangerous, I think so. But he was able to manage it.
What happens in this area today? I mean, in terms of people?
It's partly a living area. People are living here. Lots of shops. Administration is around. Well, it's the center of the city. Especially in summertime, you could see here people sitting around in the sun and relaxing. The tourists are walking around here. Lots of people are waiting to go up to the tower to have a look around Berlin. I don't know if you were ever upstairs in the...
I haven't been. What's it like?
It's very interesting because you can see, I think, 30 to 40 kilometers if it's clear weather, and you even can see the border. It's interesting. You can just see from the tower the wall. It's interesting to see the border within the city.
Would East Berliners go up to take a look at the border,
Sure.
or did they care?
Sure, yeah, sure.
This is as we've talked, this is an interesting time in your city,
Yeah.
and then a very historical time. How far are we from where we are sitting from some of the events that took place last fall?
No, but just over here is, let's few hundred meters from here is Alexanderplatz. And there was the big rally on the 4th of November when people were demonstrating for, the special point was freedom of press. That means there was always in the Constitution, there was an article, I think 27, about freedom of press. And people were saying, well, let's take this article of Constitution serious. Let's have real freedom of press. So people started demonstrating down this Karl-Liebknecht-Straße around the Volkskammer, around this building, and then back to this side, to the Alexanderplatz where the big rally was. And I think that was one of the biggest rallies in the last decades, which was held here. A peaceful rally, a rally full of humor. These days they are starting to have an exhibition with all these banners and all these slogans which people took with them. There's a museum of history and they will show, starting these days, all those slogans. It's wonderful, so creative and so full of humor, all those slogans. It was really a wonderful event.
Is that somewhat amazing to be able to have those types of placards and banners displayed in East Berlin?
Yeah. Sure.
Were you at that rally?
Yeah, we took part. The whole staff of our paper took part because I think it was our own cause. You see, demonstrating for freedom of press, that's our job to do it, you see. I think so.
We read about the politics in papers like yours, in the Western papers.
Yeah.
But what is life really like for a normal East Berliner today? What's their problems? What's facing this city?
Well, today it's complicated. I think, as I told you, people are feeling insecure. They don't know about what is going on, especially in the field of economy. You have the influx of Western goods, for example. They are sold here to a rate of 1 to 3. That means if you have a good something which is to be sold for 1 mark in the West, it is sold for 3 marks here. But the wages are 1/3 to 1/2 here lower than in the West. That means you don't have to pay 3 times, but really 6 to 8 times. You see? That is something people are angry about, and people are waiting for this so-called monetary union to get wages and pensions and everything in the Westmark afterwards, and to have better relations in prices and everything. So people feel insecure and people are concerned about this thing. People feel that changes in economy might lead to unemployment, for example, and they fear that they might be affected by unemployment. They have no experience with unemployment because there was no unemployment before. Everything is to be new. You see, after 40 years, people are not accustomed with this kind of life you have in the West. So They are afraid, they don't know how things are going on. And I think that the main thing now what is affecting people, and it is affecting every discussion if I talk to people. I think after some months things will change. After people know how things are going on, then it will be clear. But now you can even find from we receive lots of letters from readers. And you can see from these letters that people don't know how things are going on.
Some say it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Maybe it's hard to say, because nobody knows at least what are the rules. I can tell you one thing. I'm going out every week to I have a small flat in a small village, 80 kilometers from here. It's a very small village, only 60 inhabitants, 14 houses, very small. These people are used to work in an agricultural cooperative, getting their wages there, and not so high wages. They have low wages, but apart from this, they have chicken and they have some pigs, and they are growing up vegetables and selling these things. They were selling, for example, my neighbor, she had about 100 hens, and 100 hens are producing nearly, let's say, 100 eggs a day. And now suddenly they got news that those trading firms which were buying the eggs, they don't take any more eggs. But these hens are producing every day 100 eggs. What to do with them? So last week when I was outside there, she offered me eggs and she started to kill all these hens. They are killing hens, thousands of hens now. These people think it is worse for them at the very moment. You see, they are losing income now. Maybe after some months, if things are changed, it will become better, but now it is a problem for them.
Have people been getting housing and food subsidies here that will be cut off?
Yes, yeah. Nobody knows what about subsidies. Nobody knows. Nearly everything is subsidized. The public transport, housing, lots of the food, for example, coal even, for heating. Everything is subsidized. Well, I think the subsidies will be cut, but I think step by step. You can't do it only step by step, because otherwise people aren't able to survive. I can't.
We are almost out of time. I wanted to ask you about something you brought up earlier, history repeating itself.
Yeah.
In terms of problems of this city, in terms of the history of this country, what kind of fears do you have about history repeating itself here?
I think my main fear is a reawakening of German nationalism. There are some signs. There are some signs in the West. There are some, I would say, even stronger signs in parts of East Germany. There was this slogan, there are slogans, be proud to be a German, and so on and so on. There are new signs of hatred against foreigners. We have a lot of Polish people here. There are Vietnamese living here, and now even there are workers from some African countries. We have some 1,000 workers from Mozambique and Angola which are working here. And you have signs of hatred against foreigners. And I think, well, a united Germany will be a very strong country. Strong in size of population, of space, of economy perhaps. And if the West German politicians are saying, even here, are saying a united Germany must be bound in very closely into a united Europe, I think that's very important. Otherwise, it might be dangerous. I think it's very important to be careful about relations, especially to the neighboring countries, especially to Poland, because the German-Polish history is a very special history. I think the Volkskammer, the parliament, will today vote for a declaration concerning the German-Polish border. I think it's very important to do this because this is my special fear, and I think people, especially that's one of the responsibilities of a journalist, to fight against this nationalist or chauvinistic feelings, because I judge this very careful. From our history, we see 2 times from this German nationalism that were 2 world wars at the end, so we have to prevent a 3rd.
Thank you very much for spending this time with us. Are you surprised that you could sit here for 35 minutes and talk with American journalists? Would this have ever happened before last fall?
No, never. No, never.
Thank you very much.
Join us tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for coverage of the European Parliament from Strasbourg, Germany. 2 weeks ago, we spent several days at that headquarters of the European Parliament conducting interviews and live viewer call-in programs. We'll air a series of those shows again tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific Time. Coming up next, we break for a look at the schedule, then in a few minutes bring you a roundtable discussion on media coverage of Washington, D.C. Mayor Marion Barry.